I'm gonna bring us back to our original question, which was, what connects you to this issue, and what's your specific avenue of change that you'd like to employ here? Rick's basically given us Maps' program for the next 5 years. The good thing is he actually has more, and I'm sure he'll fill the rest of the hour with it. But yeah, let's get back to your personal connection to it and the avenues that you're working in.
Okay, well, I write for Erowid.org, which is a fantastic psychedelic information site. Yeah, give it up for Erowid. And I feel like one of the best things that we can do is collect data and to testify about the types of experiences that we're having. I think that as we're able to build a consensus about, wow, you know, people are regularly having these transformative experiences. People are regularly being healed in this way. People are regularly being able to free themselves from addiction. People are having these interpersonal bonding experiences, and then beyond that, you know, the other 99% of reality. And I think that the way to bring this thing is through seduction, through showing people, wow, you know, maybe they're missing something. You make this art and they say, wow, you know, is it really that you're contacting these other entities, or is it really that you're, you know, healing yourself and you're having these heart-open experiences? People are being cured from PTSD, end-of-life anxiety. And these studies are already out there. These guys are doing it. Spirit Molecule is a great example of, like, taking a piece of media and going, look, there's this awesome thing that maybe you don't know about this. And the more people who really understand that this possibility is out here, the more people are going to say, wow, you know, this is a basic human right. I think we need to I think we need to get the 1% high. I think we need to get the movers and the shakers high, like get behind the scenes and take them in the back room and say, hey, you know, this is what's really going on. And I think that's probably going to be one of the things that does the most good. It's hard to fight things with pushing against, but, you know, I want to pull them towards.
Just as a side note, that actually was a tactic used during the acid revolution in the 60s, and there were a number of people who tried to get acid to the most influential people, and there's lots of stories that John F. Kennedy was dosed, and that led to his whole change on ending the Cold War and all of that. So check that out when you get a chance. Mitch.
Again, my name is Mitch Schultz. As Charles mentioned, I'm a filmmaker, in general just a media maker, and through my own personal experience, I had tried psychedelics from a pretty early age, and in a pretty reckless way. I don't think that there was any kind of responsibility behind it or any thought. There was something maybe I was chasing, but those experiences, you know, from the age of about 14, 15 years old up into my maybe mid-20s, didn't do anything for me, and I think there was a lot of other things that were under the surface. So when I had this bigger experience into my early 30s, all of that kind of came forward at once, and all of a sudden my life had changed in a very quick time. And so I started to think about, all right, how am I going to go out and communicate this with people and try to understand what the hell just happened to me? So I'm kind of coming at it from a very personal perspective, but as I go out and I start to talk to people and communicate some of these ideas that I've been struggling with and trying to work through in my life, a lot of other people have these stories as well. And as TeaFaerie was saying, it's important for us, I think, to start documenting this on a pretty regular level. There's almost research going on amongst this community, and it's important information that could play a big role down the road to start having people say, okay, there was a particular sensation that came along with this, I was in this particular state, I was feeling this particular way. We can start to catalog that a little bit more. And of course the research that MAPS and a variety of other researchers around the world are starting to do is do just that. But that's a small percentage, and there's a lot bigger percentage of us out there that may be exploring these realms. So to be able to kind of pull it in on a personal level, but then how that's going to feed into the broader culture hopefully eventually. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it. I'm trying to sneak in the back door with media that is sexy, hopefully, and seductive, but also smart and engaging, and at least opens up some ideas, or at least opens up some thoughts for people to say, hey, I'm not thinking about this necessarily in that way, but it makes me think this, and just start to play with it a little bit. So my goal is to start pushing some media out there that's really just going to ask a lot of questions, and hopefully let all of us come to some conclusions on a broader scale. So, yeah.
So the question exactly was what again?
What's your connection to this issue
of
wanting to end prohibition and push us to a prohibition world?
Right.
And what avenues are you using?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said before, Charles, that the war on drugs is a war on consciousness. And, you know, that, as you also talked about, I totally agree with you about the surplus labor population and basically being used as a social control mechanism. And on the one hand, it keeps down, especially in the United States, the minority and poor populations. And on the other hand, on the other extreme, it stops, you know, those, you know, who might access these other levels of awareness or go through a process of deconditioning that people were starting to have in the 1960s, where they then confronted all the problems of the society, ecologically, socially, and every other level. So yeah, those are the two reasons for this war on drugs, I would imagine. I mean, I've tried to contest it, you know, through, you know, writing a book. I wrote Breaking Open the Head, where I explained why, for me, these experiences were extremely valuable and important. And now through Reality Sandwich, we've had hundreds of writers probably on similar subjects. And now through Evolver, we're sort of seeking to create communities where people discuss and share information and ideas, and also not see the drugs, you know, see the drugs as one part of a larger constellation, you know, of issues and ideas that we need to address, you know, culturally.
Okay, the next question I'd like, and we'll come back to Rick, is knowing what we know today about the psychedelic revolution of the 60s and the introduction of psychedelics to the culture, what have we learned in the interim 40-some years that will help us go about it differently?
Okay. Well, I'll take a brief moment and answer your first question, because I didn't answer it. Basically, when I had my bar mitzvah when I was 13, I was under the belief that it would turn me into a man. And I remember waiting in bed after the next morning, and I thought I was just the same. And then I started telling myself, God must have been busy. This must have been a lot of people who got bar mitzvah. And so after a week, I finally realized that the ritual didn't have the power that I wanted it to do. So when I first did LSD at 17, I thought, aha, this is something that can turn me into a man. And then the other part was Hitler and the incredible way in which people can project and scapegoat, and trying to find tools that could get down deeper below that kind of and help people deal with it. So that's kind of my personal connection. So the idea of the mistakes of the 60s, or what we learned from the 60s. Well, I mentioned already one, the idea that a counterculture, when you self-define as counterculture, I think you're doomed. The other part is that we were too enamored of psychedelics, and it was like one dose miracle cure, and you're permanently enlightened, and you're smarter than everybody else. So there was an enormous arrogance and naivete about how it was all supposedly in the power of these drugs, and the emphasis on the integration and working to learn from the drug experience and build yourself more towards that without the drugs, that was lost. So I think that was, then the other big thing was that when you respond to your opponent by mirroring what they do, you're lost. So what I mean by that is that Tim Leary and others were spokespeople, and they saw that the government was massively misinforming people and was exaggerating the risks. This whole thing about how LSD caused chromosome damage and it would cause, you know, birth defects. The first date I had with my wife, she said she, you know, was kind of leaping pretty quickly, but she said she would never want to have kids with me because I had done all this LSD. So I think this massive misinformation was coupled with a suppression of the research, shutting it down, and a denial of the benefits. So in response, Tim and others exaggerated the benefits and minimized the risks. And so when you're in a situation like that, you're going to have a lot of people come unprepared for the power of the psychedelic experience, and a substantial number of them will have problems, in the sense the reason for cosmic care. So what we have to do, and what MAPS is trying to do, is to find a middle path where we're very interested in understanding the risks of these drugs, and we want to understand them in a credible way, and we want to become the expert on the risks, and we also want to become the experts on the benefits, but we don't really want to exaggerate them. So I think those are the main lessons I've got from the 60s. The other is just that we see more and more, you talked about global warming, there is no private utopia. There is nowhere to run. I mean, we are totally all in this together, and to think that, like Aldous Huxley in his book Island, you know, he changed that book as he was writing it. It was this utopian island, and at the end of it, it got destroyed by the powers of corporate oil. So there is no way to run. We have to go to the heart of the system and change it in that way. I think when we can do all those, we'll really promote change.
Wow, I wasn't there in the 60s, but I feel like that super flowering was sort of a first enunciation of something. So when this thing first landed, there was a rush to go, wow, what is it? And to start to apply models to it. And so people would say, oh, okay, is it like, you know, Eastern mysticism? Is it psychomimetic? Does it, you know, imitate psychosis? And then, you know, later as we sort of like discovered more about shamanism, we're saying, oh, okay, well, is it, you know, is this a model that we can use? And now, you know, we're reaching out to other models. I had this ayahuasca trip where Mama comes on like a sentient browser program and was like, I'm scanning you for, you know, patches and cookies and checking you for viruses before logging you on to hyperspace proper. And like, there's so many new ways to start thinking about it. And I think that one difference is that that was suddenly psychedelic culture landing all at once. And I think now there's an existing standing wave of psychedelic culture. So now you have festivals like this and you have cultures like this that are already in place. And so as new people start to come into it, they're not all coming onto it at once. They have something like elders in the community who are able to, you know, point them towards sources of information and kind of give them a sense of what's probably going on for them. They have stuff like Cosmic Hair. And I think it's just that, you know, we've started to already have a culture that's in place for it that's really making a difference now.
I think there are a couple things, I guess, that we've learned or that I think that we have now that can kind of benefit us. I think one of those in a lot of ways, and I wouldn't be all end all, but technology and even some of the science that we've been able to discover, if you will, or open some doors to, and this could go from quantum physics all the way down to just computer codes. It gives us a different perspective on what the potentials are. So it gives us some space to say, okay, maybe there is something more to this that we don't quite understand. The second part about it, I think, is time, and having that perspective away from, you know, the hustle and bustle of what happened as soon as these cultures slammed in together. You know, essentially coming out of World War II and having a large portion, you know, large, but a pretty good number of people in a culture and a group of young people that were coming into adulthood to have this smash, if you will. That's a big connection, and all that's kind of finally shaking out a little bit, and we're able to kind of revisit these things and say, all right, there was some really solid work that was going on at that time. We were asking some decent questions, but this kind of cultural hysteria that came out of it put things away. So now looking back at that with a little more, less emotion attached to it, I think is going to help a lot. And then trying to navigate that again with the technology. How do we start to use some of these new technologies to put some new models on our research, even spiritual states? So I think kind of those two things.
So I guess I would say that there's been an evolution also in the connection a lot of people in the modern world have to indigenous shamanic practices. So a lot more people, I mean, in the 60s, this stuff had kind of erupted, you know, into the world, and there was very little context for it, as other guys pointed out here. But you know, one of the main contexts that's emerged is these indigenous cultures, you know, especially in South America and North America, and their, you know, lineage of using these plants for you know, generations, if not millennia, and their availability to us now to you know, have that experience with them. And you know, I think there's something very important, you know, if you want to explore, you know, these types of visionary states with sacred plants, there's something very important about connecting to a lineage, you know, or maybe a couple of lineages. It's you know, it's like a morphogenetic field of protection that maybe goes back many generations. So yeah, so I think that that's one of the main things that I see. And then once again, for me, like we get a little bit hyper fixated on psychedelic this and psychedelic that. I mean, I've also worked with the Kogi tribe in Colombia, who don't use any psychedelics. They understood. I mean, we did retreats with them where they understood why we were drinking the ayahuasca, but for them, you know, the men chew coca leaves, the women just weave. But you know, their main thing is that we have to recognize that. You know, that we're out of balance, and the way to get back into balance is to kind of reestablish our connection between the spiritual and the natural world by creating a reciprocal relationship with Mother Earth. You know, so that's kind of their context for thinking about what they call younger brother, which is their way of referring to our civilization.
So, granted, it's a broad-based question, but what to you would a post-prohibition world look like? What would it look like physically? What would it look like politically? And what would it look like psychospiritually?
Well, okay, if Boom was in a post-prohibition world, it would be very similar to the way it is, except instead of having energy control, where you can take your pills to be analyzed, they would be sold at the mini market, and they would be standardized and pure. And you would probably need to show your ID. You would probably not have it. You'd need to not have caused problems with these drugs. And then you probably need to be over a certain age. And if you were under a certain age, you would need your parents' permission. So I think that there will be these age limits, but I think they'll be